Hey there guys, thank you for joining me for another evening walk. Very rainy old day in the northwest here. That's part of the joy of living here in the United Kingdom in the winter and the autumn, is the lovely weather. I tell you what, this is a sad day because it is a day we commemorate and remember the horrendous attacks on October the 7th in 2023, 2 years on from those horrible terrorist strikes against Israel, where Hamas, the Palestinian terrorist group, kidnapped, raped and murdered over 1,000 Jewish people in a really cowardly and heinous surprise attack. It's something that I think will go down in history as one of the worst incidents of its kind. It's certainly one of the worst attacks on the Jewish people since World War II. And for students of history, we look back and we see that post-Second World War, a phrase emerged which was never again. We must never allow this systematic hatred and discrimination and targeting of Jewish people to return. In other words, antisemitism must be crushed. And that's not to say the Jews are not immune from any sort of criticism, nor is their government. Every single government on earth should be able to be criticized and held to account. And even as somebody who stands with Israel and with the Jewish people, I think the Israeli government certainly has made mistakes, and they still do make mistakes. But on the whole, in this particular circumstance, they are responding to an act of unprecedented aggression against their people, and they have every right to defend their homeland. There is nowhere else for the Jews to go. That is the single homeland of the Jewish people on the face of the earth. And of course, as a Christian, conservative, Bible-believing Christian, I hold strongly to the fact that that was actually given to them by God. That is their God-given homeland, promised to the Jewish people until the second coming of their Messiah, Jesus Christ, at the end of the world. And so they have this home that belongs to them, returned to them in 1947-48, and there are 50-something Muslim countries where the Palestinians could easily find refuge, but they don't want to do that. And they don't want a two-state solution. Yeah, people who have been alive long enough or read history books can see. Think of people like Yasser Arafat. The amount of times they got to the last stage of a peace negotiation based on a two-state solution, and then they back out of it, because that's not what they want. What they want is the utter obliteration of the Jewish state. They chant, and so do stupid lefties here in the West now, from the river to the sea. What they really mean is we want every single Jew removed from Israel between the Jordan and the Mediterranean. That's what that chant means. If you look up the manifesto of the Palestinian authorities, they are very clear. They want to make all of what we call Israel, the Holy Land, a Palestinian land. They don't want to divvy up the land and put a border down the middle and give some to the Palestinians and some to the Jews. No, they want the total genocide of the Jews. They want them wiped out. And many Muslims around the world and Muslim teachers and imams are very open about this too. That is their stated goal, because in their book, the Quran, it says they have to oppose and kill the Jew. It's right there. That's not hate speech. That's not Islamophobia. That's just quoting from, paraphrasing from their own book. How they explain it away is beyond me, because it's right there in black and white in their book. So we're dealing with, now 2 years on from the heinous attacks against the Jews and the Jewish nation, we're dealing with what I would describe as one of the most disturbing emergences of anti-Semitism in the West that I think we've ever seen since easily the 1930s, where radical far leftists are working hand in glove with Islamists, and they're really cultural Marxists working hand in glove with extremist Muslims to call for the obliteration of the Jews. And you're seeing marches held nearly every single week all over major capital cities and major cities in the West, where people are coming out in force calling for the destruction of Israel, basically. Now, you might not say that so clearly, but it's just very, very, very thinly veiled. You scratch just beneath the surface, and that's what they're calling for. And there are even prominent Muslim influencers who have been caught red-handed. But people have gone back and checked tweets from October 7 and October 8, where they were more or less celebrating the terrorist attacks. For instance, last week, we saw a horrendous Islamic extremist murder a terrorist attack here on British soil of Jewish people in Manchester just going to their synagogue to worship. Peaceful citizens going about their lives, murdered just because they were Jews by a man who was called Jihad, surprise, surprise, and his father, who was a surgeon, right, and an immigrant to the UK, was posting at the time of October 7, calling the people who did those attacks, the terrorists who did those attacks, the men of Allah. They're basically extolling their virtues for doing this. So we're seeing the very dark, long shadow of anti-Semitism stretching across the West again. And we need to be very careful here, because if history tells us anything, it's that when the Jews are under attack, they are the canary in the coal mine of something much more sinister emerging in Western culture, much more terrifying, that we ought to be very concerned about, emerging out of the shadows, clawing back control and beginning to put its hand around the throat of Christian Western democracies. And I fear that is the sort of thing we're headed for. I fear we are headed for something very evil emerging, because there are parallels here to the 30s. There are parallels here to the emergence of Hitler and the Nazis and their rhetoric, their anti-Jewish rhetoric, which was pumped out with propaganda and rallies. And there were very precious few voices then who stood up and spoke. Famously, there's that amazing quote, first they came for the Jews, and then they came for this group and that group. And I feel that's where we are now. Even if you're not the biggest supporter of Israel or the biggest fan of the Jews, you've got to recognize, you've got to open your eyes, you've got to see the manipulation going on, that we are being railroaded into a very sinister machination of the devil, frankly, the evil one, to put it very bluntly. And I think that if we don't stand up now, then, okay, well, maybe I'm not a Jew and it won't affect me. But who's next? The Christians? And then who? And then who? And then there's no one left to make a stand. So we need to stand in solidarity with our Jewish friends. We need to stand in solidarity with their right to defend their homeland, as any other country would under such horrible, evil circumstances. And I mean, I'm pretty hardline on the whole Gaza war situation. I think it's a case of mess around and find out. Hamas decided to launch terror attacks. They messed around and they found out that Israel wouldn't let that slide. And so now that they're losing a war, they started a war they couldn't win, they start crying genocide. And if you do reverse Google image searches on a lot of these so-called starvation photos, these famine photos, these genocide photos, they're all from other conflicts and other natural disasters, like the Yemen famine of 2014. There was even one being circulated and shared by multiple accounts on X, where people were claiming there was a starving mother and baby in Gaza with all this rubble behind them, and this is basically the fault of the evil Jewish state. And then if you take a closer look, you actually look past the hate, look past the propaganda. In the photograph the mother had 3 hands. Oh, surprise, surprise, it was AI. So it's all propaganda, it's all fake. It's meant to vilify and to demonize the Jews, which is precisely what happened in the past. That's why people who read and understand history, people like me who read and understand the Bible and are seeing what's happening, this is very worrying. And it's not going to be good enough to fence it on this, I'm sorry. It's not going to be good enough to say, oh, well, it's a conflict we shouldn't be interested in, it's a Middle Eastern problem, why do we care? Because, well, biblically, we should care for the first covenant people, absolutely. But also because we are in a situation here where we're at a tipping point of falling off a cliff from decency and morality and the good Christian foundations of our culture and society, and tipping into anarchy and chaos and goodness knows what else. Authoritarian control is what we're being pushed towards. Authoritarian control, this time from far left radical Marxists. And that's what you see at these rallies, pro-Palestine rallies. You see the far left useful idiots, the Marxist students and the politicians out chanting with the Palestinians when their views are diametrically opposed. Many of these people are out there, lefties who are LGBT, chanting on behalf of Palestine, where they would be killed for their sexuality. And yet they are there supporting them through and through. Well, why? Because Satan's left hand is working with Satan's right hand to bring about something absolutely terrifying in Western civilization. And if we don't open our eyes and wake up to this and turn back from this and push back against this, then we're going to end up in a very bad place. So this anniversary of October 7, I'm feeling even worse than I did the last couple of years, because we've now backslidden into a situation where there is massive levels of unchecked anti-Semitism, where the two-tier policing and two-tier justice in this country, in the UK in particular, just let people get away with it. There's even, I saw in the news today, a doctor who made throat slit gestures towards Jews was let off and said, oh, she has freedom of speech. But someone like Lucy Connolly sends a tweet about migrants that the government didn't like, and she ended up with 30-something months in prison. So we've got a problem here of an emerging totalitarian state which is paired with the bleakest, darkest, most evil anti-Semitism, which should be a canary in the mine to anyone of good sense that our culture is in dire trouble. We are in neck deep in the doo-doo here, and if we don't start getting our way out of it right now, if we don't find some political and democratic off-ramps, goodness me, I think the situation is going to turn ugly very, very, very fast. And it could end up in genuine totalitarianism. So we need to pray, and we need to be brave, and we need to make a stand. We need to say, okay, I'm standing with the Jews, I'm standing with the people of Israel, and I'm saying enough is enough of the anti-Semitism. Enough of enough is the calls for jihad, the calls for the intifada, the calls for from the river to the sea. Enough of this garbage. It needs to stop in our society. And we need to actually turn back to some sort of decency and common sense again before it's too late. Anyway, that's what I'm doing, and I'm glad to see other Christians and other churches are doing it as well. I saw in a video that Pastor Chris Wickland's church had visitors from the local Jewish synagogue and was standing shoulder to shoulder with them in solidarity and support. So we've got to keep our Jewish friends in prayer, and we've got to be wise and wily when it comes to having our eyes open. Ask for the Holy Spirit to give us guidance about the machinations of the evil one in the world, because he is working overtime right now, and many, many people are being deceived, including many good Christians who I have a lot of respect for, are being very deceived on the front of the Jewish people. Anyway, God bless you guys. Thanks for listening. I hope and pray that this video has helped you in some way. And if you want to sound off in the comments with your opinion, feel free to do so. Bless you. See you in the next one.